This is unmuted, so now everyone can hear.
Okay. Do you want me to sit here or do you want to sit here?
You can sit here and then I'll sit here.
Okay, sounds good. So I just keep an eye on the question box and make sure the camera's on them.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Can I grab these papers?
Oh yeah. And then are you moderating?
Yes.
Okay.
And then Abigail is time for the only Christy and Jack's presentation, 14 minutes, and then 4 for questions.
Perfect. Hey, how's it going? Good. Good.
Thank you for joining us for day 3 of our symposium. We'll be getting started shortly. We're just letting everyone get settled into the auditorium. Okay, it looks like we have everyone here. So Patricia, could you go to the next slide, please? And then one more. So we're gonna be starting off today with one session before we take a short break. Then we'll move on to our session 9 before lunch. And then after lunch, we'll have one more session before we break, before having our workshop. And then we'll have closing remarks, and then we'll be at the end of our last day. Next slide, please. So our first session is called Grate Expectations, Stormwater, Urban Runoff, and Marine Debris. And our first presenter is Cindy Rilum, presenting Clean Streets, Clean Seas, Innovating Public Works to Intercept Microplastics and Urban Runoff. All right, hi everyone. My name is Cindy Rilum. I'm a marine debris specialist with the University of Southern California Sea Grant, and I'm here to talk to you about one of our projects that we partner on, Clean Streets, Clean Seas. Next slide, please. So we have quite a large project team with Jill Murray with the City of Santa Barbara serving as our project lead, and then a bunch of co-PIs from various research organizations and consultants throughout the state of California. So all listed on this slide. Next slide, please. So microplastics, we heard a bunch about them yesterday towards the end of the session. They're everywhere. It's a problem. We all know that. But why is microplastics interception in stormwater runoff an urgent issue? Well, for starters, runoff from impervious surfaces dominates its transport. So these surfaces are non-porous. That includes sidewalks, roads, parking lots. The number of these surfaces are growing throughout the country, throughout the world. And that's a problem because when we have big storms, the flow is quite large and it just carries all the debris down the storm drains to our waterways, our oceans, creeks, lakes, etc. We do have some regulations put in place. For instance, California has trash amendments that were adopted in 2015, and they require local municipalities to reduce their discharges of debris greater than 5 millimeters in size. However, microplastics are smaller than 5 millimeters, so this does not apply to them. We also have long-term solutions such as product bans, like plastic bag bans, producer responsibility regulations that are, setting the stage, but they haven't been. They take a long time to be put together. So in the meantime, we need to rely on what we already have. Our public works activities. There's about 30,000 departments across the country, and we need to utilize those, such as street sweepers, catch basins, trash capture devices, to try to intercept microplastics and see if they can in the meantime. Next slide. So how are microplastics being transported in stormwater runoff? That's what we're trying to figure out. In the center photo here, we have a catch basin. You've probably seen them on the sidewalks or on the street. Usually have a grate where the stormwater flows into. a sump where the debris is captured or collected, and then a flow or a filter where the water flows through. And so we're trying to figure out where microplastic is being intercepted. Is it on the street from the street sweepers? Is it being swept into the storm drains or the catch basins? Is it being collected there? Is it being generated as it's tumbling, sitting there? We want to figure out those questions in this project. Next slide. So we have a bunch of different research objectives. The first being on the next slide. The ability of to determine the ability of street sweeping and catch basin cleaning to intercept microplastics. We want to see what is our baseline ability. Are they even collecting microplastics or picking them up in the first place? If so, the next objective is to optimize street sweeper pickup efficiency. We want to make sure that we can pick up as much microplastics as possible. So that can be to optimize the brushes, the types of combinations of sweepers. So there's vacuums, there's wet sweepers, a bunch of different types that I found out from starting this project. Very interesting. And then another objective is to quantify street sweeper reduction of microplastics. So we want to see how much of a difference street sweeping is making regarding the reducing the concentration of microplastics. And then the last research objective is to evaluate whether trash capture devices are generating microplastics, are they transporting them, are they capturing them? That's what we want to figure out. And then together, the next slide, all of the results from these research objectives can inform the first quantitative analysis of public works activities to intercept microplastics from the street out to the ocean. So that's a really cool thing that hopefully we'll be able to pull together and help inform. And so far we've been able to make progress on each of these objectives, mainly in the pilot stage for our sampling plans, and then we're going to be starting up and kicking off the winter season of storm sampling in a couple months. But we do have some results to show on the next slide, mainly on our simulated storm events. So on the next slide, I can show you some photos from SCORP, the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. They've been working on developing a pilot project approach to develop a reliable way to figure out if we can determine the difference in water quality from swept versus unswept pavements. And this is mainly to see if there's a % decrease in the concentration of microplastics between whether or not a street sweeper has come by. So next slide. So this is a mock-up, or this is a picture of their custom-made rainfall generator and runoff collection system that they designed. They nicknamed the Squirper Soaker, and they tested this in a parking lot along the California coastline. And it basically can produce or consistently produce a uniform rainfall with a consistent rainfall intensity of 1¼ inch per hour over 70 square feet. So it's basically meant to simulate as controlled as you can of a field experiment for simulating a natural storm event. And spoiler alert, so far their method seems to be, their proof of concept seems to be working. Next slide. So to sample and to process these collections, they field sieve the composite sample. So this is all the runoff that they collected. And then they measure microplastic concentration by size fraction, as seen by the sieves here in the middle. And then they look under microscopes to do particle counts to calculate microplastic concentration. And so far, they haven't really found a % difference for the larger size fractions, but they have seen a 55% difference for the smaller fractions. So there's promise here. They just need to tweak a little bit with the sampling and the data collection, as they found out that runoff, sampling runoff water is much different than just water quality sampling. It's much more complicated, but it's really promising work. Next slide. So our last objective is to focus on engagement, and this is where me and my team at USC Sea Grant comes in. We want to make sure that throughout the duration of the project and after, we are engaging stormwater managers, public works groups, nonprofits, and the public, just to make sure we can further the impact of this research and make sure it gets out there. Next slide. So we have 3 main tasks that we're working on. The first is to recruit and convene a technical advisory committee, which we just did this past year, and it's made up of 10 different stormwater experts, water quality managers, and microplastics experts in order to help provide input and feedback on the sampling plans, preliminary results, and just help further along this process. We're also prepping to create an education and engagement working group, which will be made up of educators that will help develop curriculum-based workshops for K through 12 students surrounding street sweeping and microplastics, and then developing a GIS-based street sweeping app. So on the next slide, some more details. This app will be designed for City of Santa Barbara residents and designed by USC students next spring. And so why are we making this app? Mainly to improve compliance, because if people don't move their cars for sweeping, one car is the equivalent of 3 car lengths that a sweeper cannot sweep, and that's a problem for trash cleanup. So we will hope to allow users to opt into notifications of when to move their cars, when they can move their car back post-sweeping. And yeah, it's a really exciting project. Last slide. Just some next steps. We're hoping to finalize up our sampling plans, carry those out, set up our working group app, and then hopefully communicate those findings. But with that, last slide, just want to say thank you for listening, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. We can take questions from the audience now. And for our online listeners, if you put your questions into the chat, we will get to you as well.
Hi, you said that there was a 55% reduction in what?
A 55% reduction in the 55% difference between the swept and unswept concentration of microplastics. So they did see a reduction in the concentration of microplastics from the swept versus unswept, only in the smaller size fraction as of now. But it was a very small pilot project test, so they only did a couple sampling events, and they're hoping to do more to get, potentially more statistical significantly proven results. Yeah.
Thanks, Sydney. It's interesting what you guys are working on. I had a question. So when they street sweep, is it just pushing it into the storm drain? Are they collecting it? And if they're collecting it, is it going to a composting facility? Because I'm guessing some of it's leaves. Like, where does the plastic end up?
That is a really good question. I'm not sure on the end processing. The street sweepers are not meant to just sweep it into the storm drains or the catch basins. It's meant to collect them and then take it back for processing, but probably meant for landfill deposition and then point. But it's definitely meant to collect and pick up debris. But street sweeping, most public works were designed for just picking up sediment and larger debris, not designed for microplastics. So that's what we're really trying to figure out, if they're sweeping those away or actually picking those up.
In some municipalities, the street sweepers collect them and they go into a municipal composting facility. So then my question is, are we increasing the amount of plastics that are going into that municipal composting, if that's where it ends up? And are those ending up as biosolids as compost on fields?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure on the answer to that, at least for the city of Santa Barbara, but I can get back to you on that. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
I just have a comment. I love the app, but I suggest you tell them like how much it costs to get a ticket, like $100 or $50. Then people will really jump onto it. That's my suggestion.
Definitely, yeah. We're trying to help, influence people to download this app so that they can prevent getting ticketed, because that is the problem in the city of Santa Barbara.
Sydney Travis enjoyed the talk. Great project. Would the data from this project enable us to understand how zoning ordinances inform the level of microplastic in different neighborhoods, so that we could then redirect street sweeping assets to those neighborhoods where the most microplastics tend to appear, i.e. industrial zones, residential zones, R1, R2, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. I think that's definitely, this project can be used as a step forward to that. I think, you would need to, there is street sweeping schedules that sweep different roads on different days, and I think they would need to analyze that debris. So it would be a much larger follow-up research project, but I think that's a great idea. Yeah, and if we have the data for that, that's something, that could definitely happen.
Cool. Thank you. That's all the time we have for questions. We're going to move on to our next presenter. So for our next talk, they will be presenting for 2 projects, and they will have 14 minutes, unlike our last presentation. So Christy, Tyler, and Jake Anderson are presenting on the projects of mitigation of stormwater-derived debris, a community-based approach 1 and 2.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to present the work. And as Lauren said, we're presenting kind of on a phase 1 and phase 2. So it's actually 2 projects, one that started in 2023 and then a new one that we just started in September. And so I'm going to be giving the overview, and then Jake will take over and give some more details. Next slide. So I just want to kind of remind us about the Great Lakes, and that this estimate of 22 million pounds of plastic entering the Great Lakes was done by my colleague, and who's also on this project, Matt Hoffman at RIT. There's a lot of uncertainty in this estimate. Oh, like this?
Thank you.
Okay. And so we've been working on trying to estimate, basically trying to back out these numbers and are they actually accurate. So this started with a research project. Next slide. With the idea that a lot of the plastic that goes into waterways is actually macroplastic, although I really liked the last presentation on microplastic and does the macro turn to micro. It originates on land, and stormwater is a really understudied pathway. We really don't know how much comes from urban stormwater. Next slide. And so starting in 2022, we put out some litter traps, which are these debris interception devices that go into storm drains. We have 9 of them in the city of Rochester and in one of the suburbs. They span from the blue lines in there, that's the combined sewer system. Separate sewer is the green lines, and we have both, even in the city. And we put them in the urban, suburban, and residential commercial, and then monitor them every 2 weeks for the first year, and then every month for the second year of that. Next slide. So this was a NOAA marine debris research project. For those that are not familiar with the litter traps, that's what they look like. So the students go out and they were measuring these, brush everything into the drain, bring it back to the lab. Next slide. And a lot of it is organic. Usually about 80 to 90% of what we find is organic, but then in amongst that is all of the debris. So there's a lot of steps. It's pretty tedious. Next slide. And then it gets oops, let me go back one. No, keep going back. This one. So we sort it, material, size, category, and morphology. A lot of it is recognizable, is one of the main points. Next slide. And so this is what we would find in a 2-week period in one drain in the city. This is a commercial area in front of a convenience store. Some metal, some glass, lots of paper, but a lot of plastic. And so the next slide. This is the average monthly input across all of our sites. So the left is the number of items per month, and the right is the mass, and so that's broken down by material. And there's a lot of information in here, but one of the biggest takeaways for us with this was just how incredibly spatially variable it is. From a neighborhood block in these paired traps, you have a really big difference in the mass, in the composition, in the types of products. And so that really kind of started to inspire next steps. Next slide. And so we had another student, Jay, who is just finishing up this model using a regression modeling approach to figure out on a per storm drain basis, how much do we predict is going in terms of plastic. And his daily plastic input for the city and Brighton is about 45 kilograms of plastic per day in the summer. It's a little less in the winter. About a third of this, so a third of the 15,000 kilograms per year, goes to the MS4 system. So that goes straight out to the environment. So we have these great models now, almost. He's going to defend in like 2 weeks. Next. You have this model, and so we can use these results to do some really targeted mitigation. So one of these is debris interception and a more targeted way, and then the second is more meaningful community engagement, because we know this is a really, really hyper-local problem. Next slide. So I wanted to bring this up because we also are really lucky to have just been awarded one of the, Jonathan Pennick yesterday mentioned NOAA Marine Debris Program's interception grants. We got one of those, And so this Community Action Coalition also serves to support that Marine Debris Program grant, where we're trying to scale up with where do we put litter traps, because they are not an inconsequential thing to put in and monitor and empty and maintain. And so if we can do it in a more targeted way, we can start to pick away at the problem. So we're going to be expanding this modeling approach and trying to hit on some ranking criteria and a geospatial model to target where to put them and work with the county, who will eventually take over the maintenance of the litter traps. So then next, then we're using our results also for the community engagement. Based on survey results in Rochester, about 2/3 of the people in the city don't know where the water goes when it goes down the storm drain. And it's confusing because sometimes it goes to an MS4 and sometimes it goes to a combined sewer. But this is really kind of the crux of what we want to do, is be able to connect people to the water. Next. So we're using the litter trap technology as a tool for this kind of hyper-local connection to debris in neighborhoods in the city, with the idea that we want to connect people to stormwater and ultimately to the health of the lake that everybody is relying on. Next. So the project, we have the grant name, and then we did a lot of work to come up with a better name, which is Cascade. So Community Action for Stormwater Cleanup and Debris Elimination. And this is our Community Action Coalition grants from 2003, and then starting in 2004. 2003 was in Rochester, and then starting with the new phase, we'll be expanding to Buffalo and Syracuse. We have a lot of partners, especially New York Sea Grant, but different municipalities, a marketing consultant. We work with the zoo and the museum and the schools and the city. Next slide. For those not familiar with the Western New York area, Rochester, Buffalo, and Syracuse are the three main urban areas that drain into Lake Ontario and also into the western basin of Lake Erie. And in these maps, it's a little hard to see, but those darker kind of purple areas, that's all the environmental justice areas of the city. So in each of these cities, the environmental justice areas are big, and so we have a big opportunity to go in and do some work in those areas. Next. So ultimately, the goal is to reduce the debris. And we're doing this using interception technologies, but using that as a tool to reach people. So improving awareness of the personal contribution to water quality, reducing stormwater debris. We're working with the underrepresented minorities in the city to inspire them to go into environmental careers. And then ultimately, a piece of this is also to increase adoption of debris capture technologies with a lot of different activities. What we're mainly going to be highlighting today is the curriculum that's been developed. Next. So we're designing the curriculum around the litter traps, and each site that we work at has 2 litter traps with site-specific programming. It's based on the meaningful watershed education, environmental education model from NOAA, and with a focus on environmental justice and underserved communities. Next. The programming, again, is around this litter trap technology. We are working in 3 recreation centers in the city that are run by the city itself, a couple of schools, the Science Museum and the zoo. In Buffalo, it's a couple more schools, and at the University of Buffalo, and in Syracuse, it's in kind of high visibility areas near College Town and down at their Science Museum. With a kind of this modular approach that the curriculum can be kind of taken apart and used in pieces at each of these sites. Next. And so I'm going to hand it off to Jay, but I just wanted to first acknowledge our environmental education specialist is Katie Stoss, and she was able to develop the beginnings of this curriculum with a New York State Sea Grant mini grant for environmental education, and then she's taken this and expanded it. And moved it into the programming that we're doing now. So I'm going to hand it over to Jake.
Yeah, so she was a huge role, Katie Stoss, in building this 12-week program that we have. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to break it down a little bit. So the first 3 weeks is kind of the introduction to plastic and plastic pollution, kind of what it is, how it gets into the environment. We haven't been able to fully do the 12 weeks exactly because installing the litter traps has been a little bit of a hurdle. So starting off, it kind of has to get twisted up in the beginning, but in theory, the litter traps will be installed and you can do the first collection that first week. And they'll participate in the collection, sorting, counting, analysis, all by university students at RIT, or I've been doing a lot of it myself. Next slide, please. The next few weeks, we love the Wisconsin Sea Grant Plastic Panic Kit. It's been a vital part of this project. The kids love it. It's very interactive. And then we also have a branding and marketing specialist, Sean Goburn, and he's been a great role in just getting the kids thinking about how can we explain to our community what is going on with plastic. Next, please. The next few weeks, more sorting, you can see in the top right, and then in the bottom right is when it's back in the lab and they're doing categorization of the samples itself. So the youth will analyze their own samples at their own school. We bring it back to them during this programming, and then they can use this to tell kind of where it's going, where it started, how it entered, what it will become and break down into, and where does it end up. So one of the things we'll do here is in the samples, we have them each collect like their favorite piece they saw. Sometimes it's a Snickers bar, sometimes it's a cigarette butt because their parents smoke. And we print out a map of the actual rec center or school that we're in. And we say, figure out on this map where it came from, how it got there, why do you think it's there, where will it end up. Most of the time, convenience stores down around the corner. And if it's a candy wrapper, someone was like, maybe it got in the trash can. Maybe they threw it on the ground. Just getting them thinking about this. Next slide, please. And then towards the end, we have them do more branding. So that's where Sean G comes back in the bottom right. We have the youth do some drawings, and then his team actually brought him back. They have a digital media person, and they turned their work into an actual kind of poster. These are still being developed and worked on. But they develop these promotional materials, and then they design community activities around it. So that's kind of like cleanups. Next slide, please. This is another one that I really love. It kind of shows how if there's debris in the environment, it's not super healthy, but as the community works to clean it up, it gets better. Next slide, please. Along with this, we've done some community cleanups and just outreach numbers as well. This is what we have so far. So we've done 4 community cleanups. We've had 97 participants in those, and we've gathered 300 pounds of debris, a little over 10,000 pieces of that being plastic or other debris. And then we've had 150 students participate in our Cascade programming, and that's across the different rec centers and schools. And it's around 47 hours of total instruction. And as of June, we had 20 pounds of debris, 7 of which being anthropogenic. We have since gathered more, but it has not been done with the categorization yet, so we don't have those numbers. Next slide, please. Next slide. And we wouldn't also be able to do all this outreach without our great partners, the Seneca Park Zoo and the Rochester Museum Science Center. They have the urban ecologists at the zoo and the career ladder students at the Museum and Science Center. These are just youth that come in and gives them an opportunity to have work experience in the science field and teach their community themselves. They see about 400,000 community members each year. So it's a huge outreach aspect for us for the project. Next slide, please. And then with the expansion, as we mentioned, there's going to be 6 of these traps in Buffalo and 2 of them in Syracuse across the universities and high schools. Next, please. And these are just some of the partners that we have. Next slide.
Thank you, Jake and Christy. We have time for questions now.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Catherine from New York Sea Grant. I think this project is so cool. And Jake, I'm going to pick your brain about working with the marketing and branding specialists because I think that's so important. But my question is more big picture. What do you see as being the pathway for municipalities to adopt litter traps? If you do see that as being an end goal, I know you mentioned that you're working with a county, I forget which one, who they have a plan to adopt it. So yeah, just wondering how you can scale this up across New York State.
Yeah, and that's really with our interception grant is what we're hoping to tackle, because there's a lot of, I think, fear at the municipal level. They're understaffed. They don't want to add a new thing that's going to be a lot of work. And so being able to work with them on compromising priorities and figuring out where to put them in the area that we're dealing with, there's 30,000 storm drains. So obviously putting a trap in everyone is a no-go. But if you could say, okay, we're going to do, we've started with 9, and then this project is adding another 14, and then we want to add 50, and you kind of scale it up and you target areas of highest impact. And that's the modeling approach that we're hoping to use, is to target areas where our model says this is the most important one, and it's either an MS4 where everything it's going straight out, or it's in a CSO that's affecting a sensitive water body. We've got Runoff Bay, which has been by the state, and the county has had a huge amount of remediation, and so it's really working on what are the priorities, and doing it in a really targeted way. And then I think it's also getting over that hump of this new technology is really not that much work. So if we can say, it really only takes like 10 minutes to go empty it, that makes a big difference, and we've been able to show that. But it takes time to do that. So the ultimate goal is to be able to have kind of a transferable kit for other municipalities that includes the geospatial piece, the modeling piece of it. So you can say, okay, I want to target this. But then also the kind of how-to and where should you do this so you can get the most bang for your buck, because it is a big problem. I think my ultimate goal is that we don't have to do any interception and there's no debris on the street. So I think we need to go at it from both.
Hi, I'm wondering how you sort the debris when you collect it. Are you doing it all manually?
Yes.
Okay, as someone who has also spent a lot of time trying to sort debris from natural stuff, have you tried any technologies or anything?
Not with this project. It's really, I was talking to someone earlier, it's really gross and really kind of all stuck together, and it's a lot of work. So not yet with this project. And so we'd like to be able to get to that point. And I know that there's, techniques at recycling agencies, but we're not there yet. A lot of this is a lot of graduate student labor.
I want to put a plug in then for something we use. It's like a vacuum chamber called a trash time machine. It sucks all the air out of the natural stuff, so they end up taking on water and sinking, and the plastics float. So I don't know if that would make it easier for you. I can talk to you later about it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
For one more quick question. Really cool talk, and I want to pick your brains later because we're trying to install storm drain filters in another project we're doing. But 2 quick questions. One is, what's the mesh size of the litter trap? And second, have you guys had any issues with the ones that are already out there with in really big storm events, them getting clogged and overflowing or backflowing? And if so, how have you dealt with that?
So the mesh size is 4.9 millimeters, and that's to meet the California 5 millimeter standard. They also sell a 1 millimeter mesh. We haven't been using that because we were really worried about the filling up. And we have not had any problems so far in 2 years. Ice is an issue for us. And leaves are a huge issue. They fill up. So we do try to stay more on top of it during ice season and leaf season. We haven't had any flooding issues so far. And that's another piece of it that we had to get through with the county and the sewer department is, no, these are not going to cause flooding. And, this, as long as you do this at this cadence, it's okay. Because that was another fear that they have. So the kind of getting over that adoption fear is a big deal for us in doing this and kind of starting small and expanding.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for questions. We'll move on to our next presenter. So our next presenter, Barbara Dahl, is not able to join us in person, so we have a pre-recorded talk, and she will be presenting on their project, Protecting the Neuse River Estuary through Community-Engaged Prevention of Stormwater-Derived Litter in Urban Headwaters.
Hi, I'm Barbara Dahl, and I work with North Carolina Sea Grant, and I want to tell you about our project to help prevent some of the stormwater-derived litter that's coming from urban headwaters and flowing into our Neuse River and onto the Neuse River estuary. We are working with a diverse group of partners. I've got a number of the logos on the bottom of the screen here, and I want to acknowledge that I have several co-investigators. They are listed working on this project with me. Our work on this project really builds on a past NOAA project that we were funded through marine debris funding in 2020, in which we took the Neuse River Basin and we set up 15 sampling locations where we have USGS gauging stations. And at all those sites, we did microplastic sampling. And at 7 of those sites in the more upper part of the watershed that covered both urban and a couple rural sites, we did some macroplastic sampling. And we used a variety of methods for that sampling. And what we found is that all of our samples had microplastics in them, but the highest levels of microplastics occurred in those urban headwater streams. And we found that the level of plastic went up as the flow rates increased in these streams, so indicating the microplastics were washing in with stormwater runoff. We found a diverse amount of different microplastic types, and we found the most common were polyethylene, polypropylene, and polystyrene, but a lot of variability from site to site. For our macroplastic sampling, we used 3 different methods, and 92% of the 11,246 pieces of trash that we collected and observed we found to be plastics. And a lot of that was in styrofoam pieces, which can range from really tiny pieces on up to a very large chunks of styrofoam. We also found a number of other types of materials like plastic beverage bottles, hard plastic pieces, food wrappers and bags and things of this. With our macroplastic sampling, no matter which method we were using, we did find highest levels in the urban creeks. We have from our grid sampling of the stream and the floodplain where we kept regularly visiting the sites and cleaning them, we had much higher levels of trash, of macroplastic trash in particular at the 4 urban sites. We did visual counts at 2 streams and we found very high levels at this one Marsh Creek in Orange, and that the amount of trash that was floating down the creek increased as flow levels increased. We also had this litter getter system where we collected trash during high flows and found very high levels of trash, but at super high flows, a lot of the trash would be bypassing this plastic basket that we had in the stream. We developed an infographic kind of showing some of the links between the types of macroplastics and how that compared to the microplastics that we found, really indicating that likely a lot of the microplastics may be coming from the weathering and wearing and breaking down of the macroplastics. So based on this, we knew that if we were going to tackle plastics in the Neuse River and the Pamlico Sound, we were going to have to focus on these urban headwater streams. So to do that, our approach for this new grant is to first form that coalition of partners that I mentioned to work together to support each other. We want to better understand the transport and fate of litter from these urban areas, really dig into that a little deeper, characterize the sources and drivers of littering behavior. We really want to start to understand kind of where the trash is coming from and how it's gotten out on the ground, what role each person's attitude may play. And we're going to work to develop and target litter prevention strategies in this study watershed that we're focusing on, which is Marsh Creek. It is located northeast of downtown Raleigh. It's about 6.8 square miles in size, and we have subdivided it into 3 segments. We have two small catchments, Marsh Creek North, and we have a Marsh Creek South outlined in black. And then the remainder of the watershed will be collected. We're going to have three sampling sites at the bottom of those two subcatchments, and then one at the very lower end of that. What we see is we have kind of different levels and types of development in this watershed, with the Marsh Creek North mostly having low development and a bit more heavy commercial areas in our Marsh Creek South. You can see that a lot more of this darker red and in the main rest of the remainder of the watershed as well. In addition, we see that we have some differences in demographics and income levels between these different segments of the watershed, where the Marsh Creek North tends to have higher income levels and lower poverty rates and higher educational rates, and a difference in the demographics as well in terms of our percent of different races in the watershed. So this would enable us to kind of compare land uses as well as capture different audience segments that we may have in the watershed. So at those three kind of green dots I showed on the watershed, we have first installed three litter catchers. These are larger than the others we have. These are made from aluminum. We installed those on October 7th and 8th, and we are working with a number of the partners to have these devices purchased, installed, and then students and volunteers will be doing the clean out of those, and the students will characterize all the trash that we find in those. So after every storm event that moves trash, we'll be going out and cleaning these and doing that categorization. At these three sites for 1 year, we're also going to do grab samples of water and send those samples to the Plastic Ocean Project to be tested for microplastic particles, and they'll be doing that laboratory work there in, down in Wilmington. We've also began our street litter inventory. This is a technique we're using based on some methods that Keep America Beautiful developed, where we identify litter hotspots by driving or walking all of the street segments in the watershed and visually categorizing them based on the amount of litter between a value of 1 to 4. So we're currently working on that. This is our map. So we've already identified in one of our subcatchments in the upper part where we have some commercial areas, some higher levels of trash, with green being no litter, the yellow being one person could easily clean that up, the orange being a group cleanup would be needed, and major cleanup is needed where we have a class 4 of red. Later, we're also going to be releasing some bottles that are equipped with GPS trackers. We're following some studies that were done in Australia, India, and some out in the open ocean to see how far these plastic bottles would travel. And some of the studies have found almost 2,000 miles they were able to track some of these bottles. We'll be working, one of our co-PIs, Dr. Ellie Typhina. She's a behavioral analysis expert. She's going to be doing some behavior modeling and inventory in the watershed to look at motive, opportunity, and triggers. In other words, some people are not very motivated to put their litter in a trash can, so they might need more opportunity for that. We'll also be looking at what triggers may help remind a person to act in the correct manner and put the trash in the trash can. So she's also applying more of a marketing psychology-based approach to look at littering behavior, because we know that mail-in surveys, only a certain segment of the audience is very engaged and they will respond, and a lot of other people won't send those surveys back. So she'll be observing routine behavior in the watershed at parks, bus stops, and on the litter hotspots that we identify, and then doing these intercept surveys where she kind of casually asks questions to various diverse people in the watershed to kind of find out how they feel about litter and their views on what may make disposing of the litter in a receptacle easier. And she's also will then segment out her results by different audience groups in that watershed. So using the kind of inventory of where the trash is in the watershed and kind of motivations and behaviors, we'll then use all that information to develop and to test interventions, working as a group, as an alliance. This may include adding more trash receptacles. It may just be there's just a trash can desert in parts of the watershed. We may do storm drain stenciling. That may be a trigger that helps remind people that we need to put the trash in a receptacle and not on the ground. It's going to wash into the creek. Or signage to educate. We also hope to engage with some businesses in the watershed and work with them to improve their waste storage, to educate employees and even customers to both prevent inadvertent waste getting out as well as the littering or kind of more direct waste. Some of the outcomes we hope to achieve are to form kind of the strong anti-litter alliance campaign, this group together to identify some of those target areas and some uh, educational and cleanup efforts that will work based on that specific type of demographic or land use to increase our understanding of the links between macro and microplastics, to dig into that further. And we also will be working to develop a toolkit of effective strategies to reduce this waste and to circulate that out to a number of communities in our state and beyond. So we've got our contact information here. I'm sorry I was not able to be with you today, and please reach out if you have any other questions.
So if you have any questions for Barbara, please reach out to her email that was up on the screen. Now we're going to go ahead and have a short break before we move on to session 9. We will see you all at 11:30.
Hi.